Influencing popular culture, politics, and everything in between. The local station takes you ringside as we discuss the crazy world that is professional wrestling. This is Going Ringside with the local station.
Hello, I am Scott Johnson. Thank you so much for joining us on this special episode of Going Ringside. I'm excited about this one because we have a GOAT with us today, greatest of all time. We're talking about that man right there, Royce Gracie, the inaugural, the first ever UFC world champ. We'll talk about him in just a bit. If you could widen out the shot a little later on in the show, we're going to be joined by that man who brutalized me last week, Cash Flo, pro wrestler turned bodyguard for Sylvester Stallone. Stay tuned for that coming up. But first, our first guest, put up the video right now. I want to talk about Royce Gracie, the most impactful UFC fighter ever. He was in Mandarin in Jacksonville this week, in the Mandarin area, at Studio 8 BJJ, John Jock Machado. Jiu-jitsu is what they teach there. And I got a tip that they were going to have the GOAT there at this jiu-jitsu studio in Jacksonville. I was like, oh my God, we could have a chance to talk to Royce Gracie. So we went down. Look at all those students who showed up to learn from him, to learn from the best ever. You can come back to me on camera right now. So Royce Gracie, the guy who reinvented jiu-jitsu along with his family. It was his family doing this down in Brazil decades ago, changing how fighting was done. And when UFC started, it was just this brand new thing, Ultimate Fighting Championship. In the early 1990s, Royce Gracie is the guy that the family selected to go fight. You know who he fought in the main event of UFC 1? A friend of the show who we've had on a lot. He's talked about it, Ken Shamrock. Shamrock, the UFC fighter turned pro wrestler, who we've had on several times. You can go check out the archives. He talks about his history, and I think he talks a little about fighting Royce Gracie back in the day. They did have a wonderful rivalry. I asked Royce about that, but he is the guy that changed the world. UFC today is the multi-billion-dollar global juggernaut it is because of what he built in the 1990s. And now he's going around to jiu-jitsu studios. He travels all the time, he tells me, to teach this unique form of martial arts to students abroad, students of any size, to show that you can beat anyone with just a bit of leverage. So let's get to it. Our first guest, the one I'm so excited to talk to right now. Here is the original UFC world champion. Here is Royce Gracie. Well, we're excited to be joined now by maybe the greatest of all time, Royce Gracie. Royce, thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
The greatest of all time will be my father.
The greatest of all time would be your father, which fascinates me. Talk to me about the family dynamic. It did not start with you. It started in Brazil with your family.
It started in Brazil with my uncles, my father, then my cousins, my brothers, the whole family involved in teaching self-defense.
And they learned a form of jiu-jitsu that your family essentially made famous to the planet.
They learn and they teach, but they became famous because we prove it, we put it to the test to find out which style is the best.
When UFC started, if I understand right, you were selected to kind of go in and be the face of this? Is that how did that work?
Of course, it's all about looks.
Yeah.
No, it's my father. I mean, all the brothers, my cousins, they could have done the same thing. It's just my father, I think, trusts me because I wasn't going to beat up the opponents. I would just subdue them without hurting them. And that was the message that my brother and my father wants to send.
Now, we've had a man who you know pretty well on our show several times named Ken Shamrock. I'm sure you know Ken quite well.
Oh, my arm is still missing his neck.
Talk to me about that. Talk to me about going into that first UFC one, you and Ken face off. What was that like?
Well, I was about 178 pounds. He's 220. So I choke him out in under a minute. That's what shocked the world.
How did that work? So your form of jiu-jitsu was like nothing anyone had really ever seen before.
It's a self-defense style. So my father never said walk in to beat your opponents. Walk in not to lose the fight. If I don't lose, the question is how I'm going to beat them, how I'm going to win.
And then it goes on. How long did you fight for professionally in UFC?
Oof, too many years.
Too many years? Can you believe what it became? Did you know back, I think it was 92, 93, what it would
The first
turn into?
one, yes, it's been 30 years.
Are you surprised how big it got on your back?
No, I'm not surprised because we knew once America find out, the whole world will find out.
And now does this
It's
multi-billion
all
dollar...
over, and all over the world.
Who were some of your toughest opponents, would you say?
It's inside of my head, my imagination,
Really?
not the opponent.
It's in your head. That's your biggest opponent. What do you mean by that?
I got to deal with that monster inside of my head. The opponent might not even show up on the day of the fight,
Really?
but people won't sleep before the night before the fight, thinking about what's going to happen.
I heard an interesting story you recently shared on Joe Rogan. When you were 14, you said, I think your bicycle was stolen,
Yep.
jumped by 4 guys. What is the... It's fascinating for me to hear about a time when that could happen to you.
I never had a fight before, and all my brothers, cousins, everybody had a fight, and I want to get in a fight, so I went to a bad neighborhood just to get in trouble.
Wait, you went on purpose?
Yes.
Really?
To see if something happened, and it happened. I got jumped, got in a fight.
What was that like for you? I mean, mentally?
Prove that I can do it.
Really? And then it was off. Did you learn from your family, or how did you learn to fight?
Well, I got my father, my uncles, my brothers, my cousins, everybody was teaching, so I learned from them.
Did everyone know not to mess with the Gracie family? I mean, were you guys like scary in Rio de Janeiro, or was it Rio de Janeiro?
We had a name. We
Yeah.
had a name. we don't pick fights, but we don't walk away from one.
Sure. Now, talk to me about the jiu-jitsu you do now, post-UFC. Talk to me about what you do today, why you're here in Jacksonville.
I travel about 8 months of the year all over the world teaching the art that my uncles and my father create.
So it was designed, if I understand right, for someone who doesn't need to be huge.
You don't have to be big. You don't have to be strong, fast. You just got to know what you're doing.
And
Once you know, it's easy. It's based on leverage.
It's all based on leverage. So
I fought a guy who was 6'8", 490 pounds. I'm 6'1", 180. So, yeah. So it's not
how do you
based
do
on.
it? I mean,
it's not based on strength. And
is it leverage?
it's leverage. You
Really?
got to know what you're doing.
And why was the world so fascinated? You knew they would be fascinated when this happened.
Because I was not beating up, drawing blood and beating their faces up. I was just subduing them, let's say in a nice way, making them quit without hurting them.
And it sparked your career. Could you believe the amount of fame overnight that happened? What was that like for you mentally?
It wasn't overnight.
It wasn't.
It took many years.
Sure.
My family was doing this many years back in Brazil before the UFC.
But after the UFC, when UFC happens,
We knew what's happening in Brazil back then. The world did not know until it came to America. Once America found out, the whole world found out.
who are some big fighters today? Do you follow any fighters? Any fighters impress you anymore?
It's all of them. The guys that have the guts to walk in and do it. It's not easy.
Really?
It's not easy.
Like, I'm just thinking off the top
You
of my head.
know that tomorrow you're going to have to get in a fight with somebody that's getting ready to beat you up. And, yeah, it's not easy.
The one
it's not for everybody.
The one off the top of my head is John Jones. You know who John Jones is?
I know, of
What do you think
course.
of him as a fighter now? He's
As a fighter, very good fighter. Very good. Charles Oliveira, I like him very much.
How do you think you would have done with them today?
There's only one way to find out.
There's only one way to find out. Well, Royce, thank you very much for joining us on the show today. It's been an
Thank
absolute
you, sir.
pleasure. So excited to have Royce Gracie on. I cannot overemphasize the impact he had on the sport of UFC. What you see today, the multi-billion-dollar juggernaut, wasn't that way in the early 90s. Because of his success, him and guys like friend of the show Ken Shamrock really put it on the map and changed the dynamic of how fighting is viewed, not only in America, but in the world. So very excited to sit down with Royce Gracie. Now I want to talk to this man. I got a little brutalized myself, maybe not on that level, but for me it was a big deal. This guy right here, Cash Flo. Last week, if you saw our live show that we had on, he does this. Well, let's show you really quick before I describe who Cash is.
Now, Scott, do you want the real or do you want the fake?
I want the real, but don't knock me through the table, please.
Well, do I have a volunteer to stand behind Scott?
Knock him through the table.
I'm not one to fake. You know, that word is a dirty word to me, so.
Here we go.
Come on, Scott, you can take it. All right, let's get him ready. Come on. Chop, 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 chop. Come on, give it to him. Very good. Outstanding, Scott. Outstanding.
No, not outstanding. Good Lord, you know, I always take those for granted on TV. They are,
Joke's on you, Scott. Joke's on you.
So first off, that was Teddy Long sitting with me, former SmackDown general manager there, helping me host the show, and Cash Flo. So who is Cash Flo? You know, you may have not heard of him, but you're starting to hear of him more and more now. We'll get to why here in a second. So, independent wrestler, many, many years. You don't hear of a lot of indie guys, but he started to become affiliated with Al Snow. You know, head Al Snow. We've had Al on the show, as well as his cast from the show Wrestlers that went on Netflix. We had them on a while ago. Great show. Go check it out in the archives. Well, Cash Flo, one of the guys in that show. That's not where it ended for him. That's where it began. Because when he was doing this, one guy noticed him, a very familiar name. That would be Sylvester Stallone. And he's going to describe it in just a bit. He is now, in addition to all the wrestling and now acting he's doing, he's kind of become the bodyguard for Sly. So his life has changed dramatically. His star is going up, and we were excited to document it, despite the fact that he brutalized my chest, which I was feeling for days, by the way. But we did sit down with him before this happened when I was in a little better shape. So here's my interview with wrestling's upcoming superstar and bodyguard for Sylvester Stallone. Here's Cash Flo. Well, we're excited to be here with Cash Flo. Cash, thanks for joining us on the show today.
No problem, Scott. You know, I heard a rumor that you like to take chops. Is that going to happen today?
Maybe at the end of the night. I have a live show to do at the end. Maybe live on television tonight. We'll do it.
Okay. Well, okay. You need that artificial courage with that adrenaline. I get that. Okay, Scott.
That's exactly what I need.
It's good to be here, Scott. It really is.
So talk to me a little about how you got into this world. You've been all over. You've done a lot for many years.
I got into this world like any other wrestler got in this world. I enjoyed professional wrestling as a kid. When I turned 18, I found a wrestling school that I could do, and I did it. And I've been wrestling ever since. I was 19 years old. 1996, 29 years this year.
So when you got into it, where did you start? Were you I think you had told me it was kind of hardcore.
It was hardcore. It was a throwback from, because at that time, you know, ECW and Paul Heyman was the thing.
Oh, yeah.
What came to my town was something that came from that, and it was started by some of the guys. It was called IWA Mid-South, and that's where I cut my teeth for the first 10 years of professional wrestling. I got the scars to prove it, Scott, and my body feels it every day, but, you know, you have to do it somehow, and you know what? I'm not going to lie. I wouldn't be where I'm at today if it wasn't for where I was then.
So I want to talk to you about a guy who it sounds like kind of was transition for you, Al Snow. Talk to me about how you came in touch with Al Snow and what happened.
Well, I did a stint. Al has been off and on at OVW. You know, OVW has been a training ground for WWE previously, and they've also been just like a farm fed for
We
him.
had Danny Davis on the show a while back.
My first stint there in 2008, 2009-ish, Danny was still owning the company, and I did about a year there. Then I went back out on the indies, did some more traveling around, you know, stayed busy, tried to make money as only independent wrestlers can, you know, because that's all I've ever done.
Can you make it as indies? I've always wondered.
That's all I've ever done is indies.
And you've made it all these years.
And I've made it, and I've actually got opportunities. Really, indie wrestling is all about recognizing opportunities and being able to take advantage of them. And if I could say anything to the young independent wrestlers out there, pay attention when you're out there. Don't burn any bridges. Pay attention when you're out there and try to take advantage of all the opportunities you get, because you never know who's watching, as evidence what we're going to talk about here in a few minutes.
So, Al Snow, you get involved with, he starts this show, Wrestlers, on Netflix. Global phenomenon.
Absolutely.
Talk to me about this and kind of where you wound up in it.
Well, I've been working for Al since 2016. Okay, he gave me the opportunity to help train and help teach the young kids at his school, and we had just gotten purchased. Some new owners had just came into OVW, and they brought with them some connections. Well, one of those connections was the now mayor of Louisville, Craig Greenberg.
Okay.
And something happened, and he had an ear at Netflix. Well, push comes to shove, BBC Studios and a director named Greg Whiteley wanted to do a documentary on OVW and the new owners and the dynamic between independent wrestling and all the turmoil going on with all the new owners and stuff. And I was one of the main guys there. For whatever reason, I have a good. If you've watched Wrestlers on Netflix, my story it's very moving. It's a very positive story, in professional wrestling. Positive is not necessarily the norm in professional wrestling. My story was very positive. They were very moved by it, so I was kind of one of the main guys in there, and they told my story. It's a very moving story, You look back on it now, it's kind of cringe, but because of that show, Netflix on Wrestlers, I get an email from my casting agency. My wife kind of plays out my manager, and she said, look, we're filming this show. We don't know when it's going to come out, but you may get some other opportunities. Won't you go get you a casting agent? I ended up going to get a casting agent. I get an email from the casting agent 3 months after the Netflix show came out. And they said, will you read for these lines? They want to know if Cash Flo can do this. Well, I didn't know what show it was. I went and read for it, didn't hear nothing from them. I finally heard something from them, and they said, can you be in Atlanta tomorrow? Like the very next day, can you fly out and go? You got the part, you need to go. And they said, if you get a phone call from a number you don't know, it'd be in your best interest to pick it up. I get that phone call about 15 minutes later, and it's Sly Stallone.
Stallone himself on the line?
Stallone called me on the phone.
Oh my God.
Told me, hey, I wrote this part for you. You're a star. Me and my wife binge watched this Netflix show, Wrestlers. And he said, I'm telling you, kid, you have it. I don't care what anybody says. He said, you have it, and I would like for you to be in my crew. Are you interested?
Let me back up. So the phone rings, you pick up. Talk to me about the aha moment of who's on the other end of that phone call.
His voice is unmistakable. There really was no aha moment. The voice you hear in all of his movies and all of his shows is the voice on the other line. It's Sly Stallone, and I'm kind of dumbfounded. What am I going to say? That's one of the guys that helped get me through some tough times as a kid. Rocky and all that stuff. So, it was one of them moments where your eyes light up. You feel like, at this time I'm in my 40s. And I'm fanning out. I'm like, wow, this is amazing. I'm calling him Mr. and Sir. He's telling me, no, you call me Sly. We're going to be working together. You're going to call me Sly.
And he is Sly in life. That's how people refer to him.
That's how he is.
What's he like?
One of the most passionate, one of the most driven people that I've ever met. He prides himself on outworking you. He has for years.
Do you think that's why he got where he is?
I do believe that's why he got where he is. He didn't necessarily take no for an answer, and when time called for him to do things on his own, he made sure and did it on his own. He didn't hold anything back, and that's exactly why he's where he's at now. For him to be in his business, in the business of Hollywood, as long as he's been in it, to still have as much passion and drive as this guy has, he's one of a kind. There will never be another one like him.
Any good, interesting Stallone stories that come to mind that you can say?
None that I can say. All I can say is Sly is a pleasure to work with. He's a mentor. He's super generous with his friendship and the way he talks to you. I didn't, he's from what I know, he's a pretty solitary person.
Yeah.
He doesn't get out much, which I don't particularly blame him. It's probably a big headache going out in crowds of people. But I do have a story of on set. I was doing a scene in a truck with Mitch, with Garrett Hedlund, and we're doing a driving scene. We're getting ready to go beat up some guys that had busted up the wind farm in Tulsa King. And I get this god-awful smell in my nose, okay? And the director is coming around talking to us. And I swear it really did smell like the director's breath. I mean, it was just this nasty, funky smell that I've never smelled in my life. And I look over, and Garrett is over here. He's seeing looks on my face, and he's starting to snicker a little bit. Well, would you know, he had some of that little stanky-ass spray, and he let me the whole time believe that this director smells while I'm talking to him. And then no sooner than the director left and he told me it was him and we were laughing together, they hit action, and I had to do this super serious driving action scene while I'm smelling some of the nastiest stuff I ever smelled. I'm like, man, these guys are just like degenerate wrestlers, man.
Exactly.
They will rib you more than I don't know what. Scott.
Last question on Tulsa King. What has that whole thing been like?
It's been life-changing, and that was one of the things that Sly told me on the phone. He said, look, kid, he said, this is going to change your life. He said, you may want to rethink how you do things these days. And every bit of what he told me is absolutely true. It has been life-changing. You know, I'm getting more money. I'm getting, more bookings. I'm getting out there a lot more. I'm getting some other acting stuff going on. I'm getting ready to do this horror movie up in Michigan, I believe. It's been a whirlwind. It hasn't really stopped since 2 years ago, since we did the Netflix show. It's been a whirlwind. It really has.
Well, Cash Flo, thank you for joining us on the show today.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank
you.
About
that chop?
On the live show, you go check in the archives. We'll do it live on television. And so we did, and I'm still smarting from it. It wasn't a good idea, but I thank Cash for sitting down with us, telling his fascinating story going from indie wrestling to now on the brink of global fame with one of the biggest stars of all time. And then as far as stars, I thank Royce Gracie for speaking with us, the original UFC, the man who built this juggernaut into what it is today. So glad he could talk with us, and so glad you could join us on this great episode of Going Ringside. We will see you back here next time.
This has been Going Ringside with The Local Station, brought to you every Wednesday on your favorite podcast player, on News4Jax Plus, as well as the News4Jax YouTube channel.